The Just Driven Charger is back, so they've made some modifications since the last dyno session.
All right, so the Charger is ready to go back to the dyno, and the reason we are going back to the dyno is that we ended up closing off another one of the throttle plates. Originally, we only closed off one. We thought that was going to be enough. Adrian was right, decided that we need to close off another one because the car has a hell of a time trying to search for idle. So right now we have adapted and modified the bird's nest, the bird eater top hat, buzzard catcher, bird catcher, enderly thingy up there. It's already modified, it's ready to go. We're going back over to Ish. Now he's in Chino, so we're gonna go ahead and load up the car tomorrow morning. Head on over to his dyno. It is going to be a mainline hub dyno instead of the in-ground chassis dyno that it was before. One of the main reasons it's going back to Ish is actually to focus a lot on cold start and not having to physically hold the throttle open to get this to fire up first things in the morning. We were having to hold it at about 2 to 3% TPS opening, which is where the butterfly would stay open. But now Ish is going to go ahead and adjust that mechanically to keep the plates open, and that'll be the 0 to 1% of TPS reading. So for cold start, this is gonna be good to go and ready to fire up, where we don't have to put our foot on the throttle and figure things out, and hopefully not search for idle so long while it's surging and trying to figure itself out. Hopefully now, with the one throttle plate closed and only functioning through one of them, he's able to finesse that a little bit better and add some timing to that idle.
The Just Driven Charger is back, so they've made some modifications since the last dyno session. What they found was, having these throttle blades was a little bit too much throttle area for drivability, so what they had to do, they had to seal one off to make it that much more drivable. What ends up happening is with the smaller throttle blades, they'll actually just end up sealing one side of it and the two of them are okay, but because these are massive and it's got surface area, it allows more airflow, and when you just crack open that throttle blade, it's like having, one of the smaller diameter ones, open halfway. It just lurches the car forward. After the dyno, they took it for a drive. They still found it was a little bit too aggressive, so they went ahead and sealed the other throttle body off. So now what I have to do I had to make some idle adjustments to compensate for that air that was being blocked off. And I have to double check the calibration to be sure that it's got the same amount of fuel. If not, we'll be a little bit on the richer side because we've eliminated another airflow passage. Hopefully the numbers are repeatable and we can make it that much more drivable. Okay, so it's welded too. Yeah, if the idle starts to raise for any reason, we'll probably have to look at these throttle blades. I think maybe if I can take that screw out there and clean all that out. It's just like the top of your battery terminals.
Yeah.
This is my wide open throttle run. You see how smooth this RPM signal is? As I start to give it load, it starts to break up, boom, boom, choppy, choppy. And you know, we've already dropped the plug gap to about 22 thousandths, pulling all 8 spark plugs out. And, you know, I checked for broken plugs. Everything seems to be happy. The fueling is pretty much there. It's not a fuel problem. We're within, you know, a couple of tenths there, but absolutely, you know, you can even see how choppy this is every time it misfires.
All right, the car is back from Ish, and a huge thank you to him for getting this dialed in once again. We changed the airflow that's in that buzzard catcher. We have new head gaskets that change the compression a little bit after the head's being machined also. So compression ratio was bound to change. We did notice that our head gasket choice was the same that it was before, but the cylinder heads had to be machined down. So we lost a couple thousandths there, which increased the compression ratio, which in turn means you should re-dyno and recheck the power band and make sure everything's all good and working as it should. We knew that it wasn't because we couldn't get the cold start to work. We had to keep the throttle cracked. And with that buzzard catcher coming on and off, the plates moving, setting the pedal stop had to be readjusted, recalibrate the TPS, updated the firmware on the Holley HP EFI, and we actually found out that now that Ish is at SU Sand Cars and on that mainline dyno, which really loads up the rear end, the amount of load that goes on the car compared to a rolling dyno jet. On a rolling dyno jet before, we couldn't tell if there was any wheel spin. It made, I think it was 727 horsepower and 940 foot-pounds of torque, but we're not 100% sure if we were getting any wheel spin or if that was the right gear to be in for that dyno. On a mainline or a dyno pack, you generally want to go to that 1-to-1 gear ratio. They can set the parameters of how long that dyno pass is going to be, and it fully loads up the car, and it'll find any problems that are to arise in a setup like this, and it found a problem. Our distributor is a dual sync Holley. Ideally, it's manufactured by MSD anyway, but is a dual sync setup which has electronics in it for cam and crank trigger. That setup and the electronics and the amount of heat that this engine produces with this blower setup and everything that's going on in the engine bay actually caused those electronics to start to flutter a little bit. So he was getting erratic RPM signal, which in turn was causing the ECU to misfire. And even then, it brought the rev limit on about 1,000 RPM sooner, is what he was saying. He's like, what the hell's going on? Because it didn't do any of this on the DynoJet. But keep in mind, looking back at one of those dyno poles on the DynoJet, you'll hear the RPM just freaking rap out immediately. It's like a 2 to 3 second pass. On a mainline dyno, it's about an 8 to 10 second pass depending on the parameters that Ish chooses to do a full pass on. So that reared its ugly head and having to change the distributor on the spot. So we're like, oh shit. He's like, if you can get me a distributor overnighted, I'll install it, I'll rewire it, and put it back on the dyno so we could check it and make sure everything's all good, because he said the plugs are gapped properly, it's not blowing out the spark. We have an ignition amplifier also. That was also one of the things to combat having ignition blowout. But he said switch over to the billet magnetic trigger and this problem should go away. He's like, I've seen it in 4 or 5 other cars. Your car would be the 6th, and I can almost guarantee it's that. We did have a little mishap with one of the wires, I guess was touching the header, but it was to the oil pressure and oil temp sensor. It ended up not making any noise to the ECU, so Ish was able to repair those wires, tuck them away, and did a pass again, but misfire was still there. So he's like, no, it's 100% the distributor. We overnighted a new distributor and a new coil, just in case for whatever reason our coil went bad. It is a Holley HP EFI Sniper coil. There's no knowing whether or not it's bad. He said, just get me one just in case. That way we don't have to wait another day and do this again. So the distributor that we changed out actually is pretty much identical as far as you could tell externally, but it is a magnetic trigger system as opposed to an electronic trigger system with a Hall effect sensor. So exterior looks the same. Alternator was replaced and now updated. It's not chrome polished, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. We want this thing to freaking work, dude. Like, starting the car and seeing 12 volts and then the battery slowly dying, and we're like, dude, this car's ran like a total of 15 times and the alternator's already dead. That alternator has like 2 hours of runtime originally. Dead. $180 gone. Beyond the warranty. So we had to buy a new one. So we have another single wire alternator on the V-belt system, and it's pulling 13.7, 14 volts while it's charging, and it's doing everything it should. So hopefully this is happy now, because that also causes issues with the HP EFI ECU if this sees it's not charging. If the voltage starts dropping, it starts dumping more fuel and compensating for the voltage drop, because then it has to increase how long the injectors are open to compensate for the voltage drop. Make sure your alternators are working. All new modern ECUs do that. So have a good alternator, have a good battery, your ECU will be happy. Now you know. He installed that new distributor and fixed the wiring, put it back on the dyno, full RPM all the way to redline, no hiccups, no issues. He was able to dial in that cold start. Before, when we had to fire this thing up, you had to like crank it, hold the throttle, you'd have to look at the Holley HP gauge display monitor. To make sure that you're holding it at about 2 to 3% of TPS open. Now, the hard setting for the TPS and the throttle plate, it's actually cracked open out of the box. The way that Ish set it up is that you crank it, it'll crank, fire, and it'll die the first time. You crank it again and fire, and then it stays on. Before, dude, it was like fucking 10 minutes of sitting there with the throttle plate open, hoping that you could hold it at 2%, with the car surging and bouncing around, and then your foot bouncing around, and then it dying again. Dude, that starter has had the biggest freaking workout that it's ever experienced in any other car. Like an auto start-stop car doesn't go through as much pain as this thing did. Now, pulling it into the shop, you start it, it dies, and you start it again, and you're good to go. You essentially just wait for the surge to calm down a little bit, and then it starts idling perfect at 950, 1000 RPM. Put it in gear, it's not surging and lunging forward and like trying to like spin the tires, like just pulling it in and out of the shop. It's a world of difference just driving it now as to compared to what it was before. It had way too much surge before. We also think that could have been due to how much air it was sucking in, which meant how much more fuel it needed, which meant how much more retarded the timing needed to be to bring the RPM down for it to idle. Now we have some more advancement at idle. We're able to not get the headers like super red hot. We are also able to burn the fuel more efficiently. This is a crazy gas guzzler. It wastes like a gallon a minute based on what we could tell and how much dyno use it got. It went through probably 20 gallons of fuel on a dyno tune, which generally, like on the Supra, when we did 91 tuning, we only had 5 gallons of 91 in it. So maybe went through 2 gallons of 91 just to get the drivability and the flex fuel tuning. Switched to E85 and we probably only went through like 2 gallons. This thing has probably burned 50 gallons of fuel just being on a dyno. So us starting and stopping this car, it really feels like it's burning about a gallon a minute based on how much fuel it requires for us to go out and drive it again. Hopefully it's a little bit better now, that it's not like freaking surging and searching and we're not having to rev it to keep it on and all that. So it'll warm up on its own at 1000 RPM, cold start, good to go. And for reference, for everybody wondering, is this car gonna make more power? We've come to the conclusion that based on what it made on the main line, and what it would make on a DynoJet based on High Performance Academy's readings and a couple other guys comparing mainline dynos to DynoJets, we would be at about a 15% higher power rating on a DynoJet compared to what we have now on the mainline. We are almost at 1,000 pound-feet of torque to the wheels. On the SU Sandcar's mainline dyno, we are making almost 987 pound-feet of torque to the wheels, to the hubs technically, and 728 horsepower to the hubs. On the DynoJet at Westech, we were making 727 horsepower to the wheels on their dyno and 940 pound-feet of torque to the wheels. Based on our readings on the mainline, if we were to transition it back over to the DynoJet and it was 15% higher, this car is technically making about 840 horsepower to the wheels right now. That is a little over 110 horsepower bump to what we were making originally, and that's also because you have essentially full traction. You have the full load. There's no wheel spin, there's no fudging the numbers, what you get on the mainline is essentially what you're actually putting down. Now you read over to a DynoJet, they generally tend to read higher. It's been common knowledge for DynoJets to read higher from freaking day one when we were dynoing cars in the early 2000s. Mustang dynos were the heartbreakers. Now it's mainline Dynapacks and Mustang dynos that are all the heartbreakers. But this car is fully dialed in. We're gonna go ahead and get it ready for its next event outing. We do have to button up some things on the front end. In case you guys don't remember, we did have to remove the AC condenser to make sure that our electric fans were flowing fully to the radiator, because our first priority isn't the AC. It is actually making sure that the engine is running the way it should and keeping itself cool with the fans and the radiator that are installed in the car. We wanted to make sure there was no obstructions and that it'll be able to withstand idling and sitting in traffic and stop and go, because essentially in Southern California, that's what you do 90% of the time. We're gonna go ahead and button up, make sure that's all good. We also have to go ahead and drive this car over to get a front end alignment for the suspension. Because of how many times this engine has come in and out of the car, every time you have to pull the engine out, you have to remove the header on that driver's side. Because that header wraps around the torsion bar, on the front end, you actually have to remove the torsion bar and that lower control arm, which then makes your alignment go to shit again. So we've been waiting to get this whole car aligned because this motor has come in and out way too many times to remember, and it's hopefully finally ready to go, be used, be rented out, and hopefully be seen on that big screen. Someday in the future, we don't know. All that shit's still up in the air. We have zero details. As far as we can hope, yes, it'll be in Fast 11. Will it? I don't know. We really hope so. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tag us. Let everybody know that this should be in that final installment, and we'll catch you guys later. All right, Charger's ready to hit the streets again, but first things first, mother f*** you. All right, let's head on over to Ish and get this car on the dyno, so let's see how it does again. I don't know what the dude. Fuck off. I don't know what you want from me. All right, let's get on the trailer and get on off. Fuck off.
Let's get off.
Let's get off, dude. All right, the Carls, we are ready to head off to alignment, so we're gonna go ahead and get on over to Minor Auto Care. What the fuck am I saying? That was a whole bunch of words.